Hello, everyone, and thanks for listening to the Quality Hub, chatting with ISO experts. I'm your host, Xavier Francis, and today I'm here with Scott Dawson, President of Core Business Solutions, and Dennis Gilbert, President of IMC Pennsylvania MEP. Glad you could join us today.
It is great to be here, X. We appreciate it.
Yeah, good morning. Good morning. Yeah, great to be here. Thanks for the invite to be a part of this.
Absolutely. Now, today's podcast is part of our Survive and Thrive series, a podcast dedicated to delivering practical strategies for small businesses. Our mission is to help you navigate these unprecedented times of change and uncertainty. Each episode is packed with real-world advice from trusted industry experts, tailored specifically for small business leaders like you. Join us as we explore insights that can empower you and your business to not only survive, but truly thrive. And we'll be focusing today on risk-based decision-making in a time of uncertainty. Before we get into our topic, let's learn a little bit about our guest and their journey. Let's start with Dennis. Dennis, can you share a little bit about yourself, your history, your journey, and why you're here?
Sure. Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. So quick flash, I've had a couple career shifts over time. I think my first real job was a computer programmer. And then I spent 10 years working with a group of investors in the tech sector, leading a U.S. business unit for them. And I spent about 6-7 years with college university sector as an administrative role, not faculty kind of role, but as an administrative role.
Okay.
And then ran my own consulting and training practice for about 15 years. And about 3-4 years ago, came on board here with the Innovative Manufacturers Center, the IMC. Mm-hmm. And we're helping manufacturers in Pennsylvania grow and develop their businesses.
Well, that's great. Really appreciate you being here. Scott, how about you?
Well, like Dennis, I've bopped around doing this and that. Actually started, Dennis, you may not know this, I started as a Baptist minister. So graduated seminary, ended up in Northern California, serving a church there. And this led to that. And I ended up working in manufacturing as a quality manager. And from that, ended up starting Core Business Solutions 25 years ago.
Wow, 25 years.
And our latest kind of pivot is Core was purchased by a great company called LRQA out of London. So opening up new doors for Core. But I'm always up for a challenge. And I think in this day and age, Dennis, your story, my story is everybody's story. Because go work for General Motors for 40 years and retire with your gold watch days are over.
Yeah.
For sure. So
absolutely.
But thrilled to be here, thrilled to be talking to particularly small businesses that are feeling, concern, uncertainty, out of balance with all of the change. Just so much change hitting people, particularly economically. I think that we just felt we need to reach out and we need to start just chatting with folks who might be going through certain common things. No one's going through something alone.
Right.
And I think maybe people feel that way, and we're trying to bridge that gap, I guess the way to say it.
So Scott, you're on. Why does the future feel fuzzy?
All right, well, X, let me kick things off here. And Dennis, maybe ask you some questions. I know your organization, the IMC, works with small businesses throughout central Pennsylvania. And our clients who are work with our consulting company and your clients that work with IMC, I think they're all feeling a little off their rocker right now, a little unsure with changes with the tariffs and government contracting and government policy. I don't know any of us thought we could be impacted to the degree that we are in as short a period of time as we are, but it's difficult for people to know, what do I do now with my business? What do I say yes to? What do I say no to? What should I pivot and go a different direction, say with my customers or with my products or whatever? How do I deal with if I'm being disrupted from a revenue perspective? How do I deal with that? There's just so much coming at people. Mm-hmm. And then we're throwing in the idea of, well, you still ought to be doing strategic planning while you're feeling all of these things. So why is, in this kind of a situation, Dennis, what is it about strategic planning in particular that just makes it difficult to get your head around it?
Yeah, I think for a lot of businesses, of course, this seems like it would go without saying, but it's the uncertainty. And I think the whole idea of strategy, of course, is to create a pathway that reduces that uncertainty and improves the team's confidence, the organization's confidence to keep moving during these kind of challenging times. And I think your intro part of the question, Scott, was a good one. And I think many of the organizations are struggling with a lot of the things that you mentioned, especially in the manufacturers world that we work in. But there are some that are doing well too. There are a few that I think have found pockets of people maybe wanting to purchase things to try to beat some of the tariff situations, et cetera. So it's not total struggle for everyone, but of course tariffs leads to supply chain, and that can be kind of an issue. And I think a few organizations, again, especially related to manufacturing, struggle with some of the regulatory issues. Hearing from legislators that their goal is to reduce some of the tighter regulations that are on U.S.-based manufacturers, and I think that's going to make a difference. And then always having the access to capital. But I think from a strategic planning standpoint, in uncertain times, the strategic plan couldn't possibly be more important.
Do you think that the uncertainty is creating some paralysis with that decision making?
Yeah, I think that often happens. Yeah, I think that it makes people, hesitate. It makes them say, well, let's wait and see, or let's not make any big decisions right now, and things like that. So, risk comes into play. And I think that the irony of those normal human emotional reactions is that it causes them to stall or stop. And I think in every problem, there's opportunity, right? And I think in cases like this, being ahead of the curve, or being early in the curve rather than late in the curve, is also important.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Dennis. Certainly, even if the curves are blind curves and you don't know what's around the corner, to push your analogy a little bit further there. But I think that's certainly true. Do you think size in the organization makes any difference in terms of this paralysis feeling, this hesitation? Would a large manufacturer have a different set of issues to deal with than, say, a small operation? Does that make a difference?
Yeah, I definitely think that makes a difference. And I think also, and a lot of times we break it down into more rural manufacturing versus more urban manufacturers. And that's where a lot of the bigger players really come in, and they have their own sets of challenges, but they also have a huge machine behind them. And I think the smaller manufacturers they certainly sometimes can be much more nimble, but they don't move often when maybe they should because of other constraints, whether it's, capital or other challenges. But I think it's really the big opportunities for those small guys are happening when there's massive change happening. And but it's also difficult for them to sometimes be able to reach out and make those changes when they should.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with that, Dennis, certainly. So let me kind of pivot to our next topic here, which is using a risk-based approach to planning, because we're talking about planning and direction, which we all desperately need right now, but there is risk. How can kind of a risk-based mindset or approach help with planning with today's concerns, floating around?
Yeah, I think the risk factor is always an interesting discussion point, and a lot of people connect the idea of risk to threat, right? What's the threat, or what is happening here that may cause us to have risk? And I think a lot of times, again, just kind of the human side of how people tend to approach these things, they often, I think, tend to approach risk in the wrong way. So in a simple example, in a business meeting, someone may feel that taking a risk to offer an idea, maybe a competing idea to what the group thinks or whatever, and so they weigh that risk and they may stay silent. When in reality, the bigger risk is them staying silent and allowing the team to go down a pathway that might be destructive for the organization or for the team.
Yeah.
And so I think they weigh the risk wrong. So I think, in times like this, it's really important, I think, for people to collect their thoughts on how they approach risk, what they qualify as risk or risky. And another thing I think is always important is if you're in a world of constant change, which most people would agree we are. Probably the riskiest place to be is stuck in the status quo.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know from us at Core, we look at it from an ISO standard, and the risk-based is risks and opportunities. And you look at things from how risky is it? Should we address it or not? And when there's uncertainty, it's tough to focus in on data and look at things and say, you know what, let's not worry about that. Or this has now popped its head up. It's turned into something we need to pay attention to instead of and look to mitigate that risk versus we'll see what happens. And that's a tough place to probably be in an uncertainty.
Well, I think that's where having a model to follow or a game plan to follow helps. Or you can organize your thoughts. You can gather everybody's opinions. You can survey your customers or talk to your customers and pull the information together and in a more methodical way make a decision because you're considering all the components or the elements of the changes that you're facing. So, Dennis, remind everybody about risk-based thinking in kind of practical terms. What is that, and what are the elements of it? Is there a simple process that people could follow?
Yeah, I think breaking it down, of course, is always important. A lot of times, people approach a problem or a challenge it's just too big to overcome, and of course, breaking it down is important. And I think most people in the business community will quickly recognize the old standby SWOT analysis, and I think, of course, that's still a very powerful tool to use to help people find, what are their strengths, what are their weaknesses, what are the opportunities, what are the threats, and moving through those things. Of course, there are lots of other tools out there, especially some digital tools that may be available today, and lots of other ways to approach it. But I think facilitating you were saying about the meetings maybe, or some of the cultural aspects of the way you guys tackle challenges. And I think too often people will, again, get kind of quiet, or they'll back away, or the uncertainty makes them pause. And I think during a time like this, the most important thing is to keep moving. And again, echoing a little bit what Scott just said, having that roadmap, or having the strategic plan, or whatever you want to label it, to fall back on and check in on and see, are we doing what we said we were going to do, and
right.
are we sticking with that? And if not, they can always be fluid, but if not, what shifts do we need to make?
Dennis, what other tools might we just remind people of? We talked about SWOT. I think that's a good one. Are there others that are kind of your go-to approaches when you need to work through a planning exercise?
Well, I think a lot of people like to use database decisions today. Of course, we have a lot of hype around AI, and we know people are asking AI, it's Friday, what should I do today? Kind of thing.
That's right.
And maybe I'm a little old school, but facilitating conversations and being sure you're documenting, what are the takeaways from this? What are our to-dos? Again, very simple kinds of things. Of course, a lot of people will use different mapping techniques. Of course, I've heard recently the heat map kind of stuff, and other data analysis, graphical data representations, all of those things. The tools are important, and a collection of tools probably helps, but if the people behind those tools don't establish the right behaviors, it still might stall.
Yeah. Well, in your point, any tool is there to draw out people's thoughts and ideas and concerns and give, a safe space to have those conversations. And I think if you are facilitating a discussion with your team, you're going to want to not only listen to those who are really vocal, but you're going to want to make sure that those who are holding back are being, how do we get them to participate? Because that might be the gem that you need to make the best decision going forward. Or it could be a totally new idea that no one's considering because it hasn't had its moment in the sun, shall we say, and it might introduce a lot of change to the organization, or might be a contrarian kind of view to the way the group has traditionally thought together. And if Billy isn't participating or Sally isn't participating, it's time to say, Sally, what are your thoughts on this? Or after the meeting, pull her aside and say, listen, I didn't hear from you in the meeting. Can we just chat for a few minutes? I want to know what you're thinking.
Yeah.
that can make a difference in the team dynamics and how people feel about the time because they're being asked to participate and being asked to be part of the solution. It can make a difference.
Yeah, it can.
Yeah, that's so rich, Scott. I think a lot of times I like to talk to people about the concept of, okay, we're going to go round robin, which means every person, has that chance to speak. Of course, you could pass maybe once, but if you're going around the room, it draws that out. And I think we've chatted before about the idea of, here we are on a lot of video conference calls, those kinds of things today. And it's very easy to have non-respondents in a video call.
Yeah.
And people will leave those calls and say, well, everyone agreed, but only 2 people spoke during the decision process.
Yeah, that's
so,
right.
Yeah.
But I guess one last point here I'd like to bring out is that no one has answers right now. I mean, when things are in turmoil and there's change every time you turn on the nightly news or you look at your Twitter feed or however you consume information.
Mm-hmm.
So new ideas are important. Bringing out different opinions is important. Everybody's ideas are important because it could be that one thought that triggers a new path that moves you from just surviving to thriving.
Yeah.
To borrow some words from X's introduction here. But yeah, I think engaging with your team is just vitally important now more than ever, I think.
Absolutely agree.
All right, Dennis. Well, that kind of brings us then into kind of how do we make this actionable for everybody? And in your experience, either dealing with companies today or in your past, what really distinguishes the companies that can adapt quickly and do well in times of disruption from those who just struggle and maybe spin their own tires and let circumstances overwhelm them? What kind of distinguishes those who work their way through it versus maybe those that don't?
Yeah, I think it's important to keep a priority on keeping morale and encouraging agility. Those kinds of things I think are always high during times like this. And let's face it, disruptions take more energy than the status quo. So think again from the people side of it, how do we, focus on keeping the energy up, acting on the upside of the curve versus getting caught up at the peak or on the downside of the curve. And knowing that curve is going to move, that curve is likely to shift across time. Mm-hmm. Also, I think planning probably shorter visionary statements. I mean, that might be literally, or it might just be behavior based, but, having that ability to really focus, what's going to give us the most bang for our dollar right now. Because right now is what matters the most. So I think it's a mindset that sometimes is hard, breaking down those roadblocks and breaking down things that are right in front of you to keep moving forward is always important. And a lot of times the obstacles feel too big to overcome. And of course, shorter visionary actions to move beyond those are what really help separate those that are more successful compared to those that are less successful.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, when we started the conversation today, we were talking about strategic planning, which I think in most people's minds has this long-term horizon to it, right? You're thinking long-term. Yet we're in a time when long-term is so difficult to vision because circumstances could change so much that we put all this effort into a long-term plan, and in 3 weeks things have changed and we got to go back to the drawing board. Are you suggesting then that maybe have a shorter time horizon, think more immediate things we can do?
I think one of the things that happens, exactly maybe perhaps what you're expressing in the strategic plan, often, and it may vary, but often the tactical approaches that are set forward in a strategic plan are broader and thus longer. Having the shorter actionable items that can detect progress or can signal progress or maybe signal that's a path we don't want to be on. All of those kinds of things I think are really important when things are rapidly changing and there's so much uncertainty. A lot of people like to base decisions on history, and of course that matters some or a lot. But when the path is uncertain, I think it's that those shorter bursts that really help get people and teams beyond the obstacles that are in front of them.
And they can focus on something, right? They can focus on accomplishment, even if it's a short-term kind of thing. I I have a boss here at LRQA. She's fantastic. And she regularly says, whatever we're going to do, let's fail fast. Let's learn from it. That's all she's saying, right?
Yeah.
Let's take action. Let's figure out what works, what doesn't work. And let's do that in as short a period of time as possible so we can adjust rather than planning for longer term. And you have this analysis paralysis, right? You never actually get to taking action. And then, of course, in this day and age, circumstances have changed so quickly that the whole project might need to be scrapped because there's just too much has changed. So shorter time horizons, taking action, getting the team involved, drawing everybody's ideas together, and then learn from your actions and iterate, right? So you're going to do this again. This is going to be a continual process to deal with risks and challenges and opportunities that are going to present themselves when there's so much change. I think it's probably a better description to describe this as a period of change rather than it's a period of, disruption certainly, but in every disruption there are winners and losers. And those who are feeling threatened, as we talked earlier about threats, might, we don't like that path. So we need to pivot and try a different path or adjust our thinking to change when we maybe didn't really want to change 10 weeks ago.
Yeah.
Maybe now we're a little more open to change, and we don't have to solve world hunger all in the first meal. Let's just do one thing and let's get some success under our belt. I think that's important.
I think something that you talked about a little bit earlier, Scott, too, when you're talking about taking more bite-sized pieces, these are some things that people aren't expecting that are coming up. So I think that you had mentioned, talk to your partners, your people that you work with, companies outside of your own place. I think looking at data might need to change as well, what you're looking at. You need to maybe reach out and get some connections to people that you haven't talked to in a while. They had very common data. Okay, this is a great supplier, things like that. Well, if you're finding that from a manufacturing standpoint, you're not getting raw material that you need from a certain supplier, maybe you need to reach out and say, hey, what's changing? And get more data.
Yeah.
And look at your risk from that perspective as well. I know we're going to talk about data-driven decisions a little bit later in the series, but just also that might be a nice pivot where you can not just look at the same old information and same old risk, but reevaluate what the risks might be.
Yeah, refresh your database.
Yes,
right?
yes, exactly.
Yeah. So Dennis, I've heard people talk about how familiar this whole situation seems to what we all just went through with COVID, because that was a big disruption. The uncertainty, the unknown, the suddenness of it, the implication to the change was so big. How does today's situation compare, I guess, to COVID, and what can we learn from it?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question, Scott. And I think there's a lot of lessons in there. And when you think about opportunities for companies and companies that really pivoted quickly, seem to have a ability to gain a lot. In other cases, people were retreating, right? They were, let's wait and see what happens. And everybody, the whole work from home movement and all of those kinds of things, which again, I'm not disputing the health side of this, but it did cause people to pause, and then they're trying to play catch up. So I think for businesses that may look at this as a time of that level or nearing that level, hopefully minus any health concerns, that level of disruption, it's a time for the people to move forward and keep moving and find ways to pivot quickly.
Yeah, I know for Core Business Solutions, we provide consulting for small businesses, and that was the busiest year we've ever had. And it turns out that, there was another component then that the government was putting up a lot of money to help small businesses get through, which gave people, we not only have time to work on for our clients ISO certification, but now we have some money that we can put toward it. This might be the best time to get this done because we've never been able to do it. So our clients pivoted, we had to pivot. We were all working from home. It was a crazy time, and it just feels similar. And we'll be looking back at 2025 as another time when we learned some lessons and we made some changes, and hopefully have a lot of successful outcomes this year. Hopefully this conversation was just been encouraging and helpful to folks, and maybe a couple of practical ideas. Get your team involved and don't be afraid of change, I think, is a key piece on that.
So what I'm hearing is reassess your risks, take a look Don't be afraid to pivot. Get everybody's ideas. Get people's ideas on the table. Hear them. See what might be a good way to proceed. Don't wait for perfect clarity. Use tools you have with strategic planning and reach out to people that might be able to help, like IMC, MEP centers, core business solutions. Don't hesitate to look at places and where other people might have some good ideas.
Hex, I'll throw one more in. I thought that you were spot on. Maybe this will be the theme of the day. This is a time where there's a lot of risk. That doesn't mean it has to be threat.
Right.
Because it could turn into opportunity. You've got to bring that point of view to your team. No one else is going to do it. You have to bring that expectation that we're going to find a way through this and let's work together to accomplish it. I think it's just vitally important.
Absolutely.
So I'm encouraged, Dennis, talking to you today. Just myself, I want to go have a team meeting now. I'm kind of pumped up.
Yeah, I think we covered a lot of the key points. And yeah, I think it's important for everybody to try to keep that morale high and keep moving. And I really appreciate, again, you guys having me on. It's great to spend the time and talk about these things. And yeah, thanks for the invite.
Appreciate you both being here today. All the insight, all the ideas you have, all of the concepts that we're talked about today. And hopefully our listeners will take some action and find a little nugget of truth and gold in this that they can use. And that wraps up this episode of the Survive and Thrive series on the Quality Hub podcast, where we unpack real-world insights and share practical strategies to help small businesses like yours. If you found these conversations helpful, share them with your colleagues, your network, or anyone who could use a boost of practical guidance. You can access all past episodes on our website at thecoresolution.com, and be sure to check out the podcast description for contact information on Core Business Solutions and our podcast guests. And remember, thriving in a changing world starts with knowledge and the courage to act on it. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep leading with clarity, resilience, and purpose. Have a great day.